What is the Police and Crime Commissioner here for, and how is it different from what existed before? There used to be what was called a police authority, which was a committee-based system made up of some volunteers and local councillors. The Police and Crime Commissioner has replaced that committee-based system with one directly elected person. So there was some confusion around it adding to the bureaucracy, but actually what it's done is it's stripped a whole load of bureaucracy out of the system. And it's very interesting starting to see how decisions are starting to be made and actually how much better that decision-making process is. And I'll give you one example. I was at a regional meeting a few weeks ago of all 4 police and crime commissioners across the Yorkshire and Humber region and all 4 chief constables. And we had a meeting and we were all pretty frank about what our priorities were. And interestingly enough, there wasn't a sort of a cigarette paper between myself and the other police and crime commissioners in terms of our priorities, regardless of party politics. And we were all there to try and provide a much better service for our local communities and actually to give victims and people more of a say in how policing is delivered in their local areas, which was quite interesting. Anyway, we had a fairly frank discussion about what our priorities were, and as we left the room, I was walking down the stairs with the then Chief Constable for West Yorkshire, and I said to him, John, I said, how did you find that meeting? Because it was, you know, warts and all really. And he said, well, it was great. I said, oh, why was that? I was just quite surprised. He said, well, for once, we got all of the people in the room who could actually make a decision, and they didn't have to go back to their respective areas and talk to their committees and subcommittees and all of the rest of it and try and sort of manoeuvre things through that bureaucratic system. And so that was a very early indication to me about the difference that this is starting to make. I'm also very keen to try and provide better value for money. So my office is considerably smaller and leaner than the police authority office, and in actual fact the cost of that office of staffing I will have reduced by about £150,000 a year by merging the roles of Chief Executive and Chief Finance Officer. So instead of having 2, we've now got 1 of each, which I think is a good thing. And we're starting to implement now the police and crime plan that I published earlier in the year. And that police and crime plan is very much focused on delivering what you want, what people have told me, in consultation with the police force and looking at actually what are the causes of crime, and also in the sort of broader and crime bit, which is around driving justice and those sort of issues. So the role falls into the sort of scrutiny and working with the police and also the wider criminal justice system, where, for example, the Police and Crime Commissioner will be responsible for commissioning victims' services in North Yorkshire. So if you've been a victim of crime, your services will be locally commissioned rather than nationally commissioned, which I think will be an altogether better, greater improvement. And then the other thing, of course, that I'm doing is meetings like this tonight, which is getting out and about and talking to people to try and listen to your views. You know, the police and crime plan was published. I've got lots of views on that, but this is an ongoing process. In terms of things that I'm working on at the moment, you may have seen I've been running a campaign on what is called a place of safety. So people detained under Section 136 of the Mental Health Act are supposed to be taken to a hospital. In North Yorkshire, we're the only place in the country not to have an official place of safety. So if you're detained under the Mental Health Act here in North Yorkshire, you end up in a police cell, which is not an ideal place for mentally ill people to be. Not only does it make their conditions a lot worse than they would have been, it's extremely distressful, and there is a high degree of risk associated with those people because they can be very vulnerable indeed. And I just found out today that we've been successful in that campaign. After many years, we are now going to have a place of safety in Scarborough, in the first instance, and then there will be 2 others delivered in this financial year. And that, I think, is a demonstration of how politics can actually be helpful to policing, because by raising this issue with the Home Secretary and with the NHS and the Department of Health in London, I've actually, given some impetus and momentum to this, and I've raised the profile of it through the campaign that I've been doing, and the blockage that had been in North Yorkshire preventing that from being delivered by the local NHS has now been removed, and we're sort of motoring forward. And so that is a good example of how politics can be good for policing. And of course, I think having a voice, having a voice through an elected representative, is quite an interesting and powerful dynamic. So, for example, there is going to be a big fight over police funding in the future. The government is reviewing the police funding formula. We're a rural area. We get top-up funding, if you like, because we're a rural area. The big metropolitan forces are saying, we've got more crime and more serious crime. We want top-ups. And we're saying, no, we don't want you to have top-ups, because the cost of policing in rural areas and the challenges that brings are very significant. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in a way that perhaps was very different in the past. So it's quite an interesting job. It's keeping me very busy, doing quite long hours, but it's absolutely fascinating. And I have to say, the police have been absolutely brilliant, and I thank them for the welcome that you've actually given me, so thank you. So, questions?
The Home Secretary today in the news apparently is suggesting that there should be a whole life sentence for the murder of police officers. I have no problem at all with that, but I would go on to think of others who are equally deserving of that sort of sentence. For example, military, councillors, politicians, nurses, teachers, and so on. Indeed, the general public. Would you like to comment on the need for whole life sentence to be imposed for all murders?
Well, I feel very strongly about it. Unfortunately, as Police and Crime Commissioner, I don't have any say over the judiciary and the sentencing. But what I do is meet with the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, on a regular basis, and feed back people's views to them. I think locally we have concerns around the reorganisation of the Crown Prosecution Service and the impact that might have on our ability to get crimes prosecuted in North Yorkshire, because if we're lumped in with West Yorkshire and other parts of Yorkshire who have sort of more serious crime, and there's fewer resources to go around, can we be confident that they're actually going to prosecute our crimes here in North Yorkshire? And that's something that the Chief Constable is extremely concerned about, and which we are raising with the CPS.
A press release was sent out headed Julia Mulligan commits to tackling rural crime. It went on to say such things as tackling rural crime is a central part of Julia's police and crime plan. Rural crime can often be hidden or go undetected, and I am committed to tackling rural crime. Your police and crime plan states that you will support, encourage and promote all watch schemes. My questions are: 1, do you accept that illegal hunting is a rural crime? 2, do you include in your list of watch schemes to support, encourage and promote the League Against Cruel Sports Wildlife Crime Watch and its army of hunt monitors? And 3, will you be meeting with the many local hunts, and I can supply you with a list of them if you need them, to explain to them how seriously you view rural crime?
Well, I do view rural crime, and if people are hunting illegally, then they're hunting illegally. So, the police, I'm sure, will take that seriously. So it's against the law, and the law needs to be enforced. So I think that is extremely important. I think there are also other issues like hair coursing, badger baiting, those sort of issues, which are really serious. I was with the NFU earlier this week talking to farmers about some of the problems that they have with rural crime, and I have to say they were really dissatisfied with some of the things that were happening, and also the service that they were getting from the police was patchy. So in some areas it was excellent, and in other areas it wasn't. So that, for me, is something that I think needs to be looked at. So rural crime is extremely important, and yes, if people are doing things illegal, like you've suggested, then it should be taken seriously.
What's the position about local police stations who have been under threat of closure? And if they are closed, how will policing be done in Pickering? How will you have access to the police?
We've no plans to close down local police stations completely. What we may do is enter into partnerships with other with local councils or tourist information centres or whatever it is. So, but we've no plans to wholesale close down local police stations. And I know there's been a bit of sort of publicity about that recently, but I can say that there are no plans to do that. We are actually investing in our police stations, and actually it's quite a good news story around our police stations. So it's slightly annoying when you get all of that negative publicity about them, because in North Yorkshire we've got a really good estate strategy, and actually we are spending quite a lot of money upgrading things at the minute.
Well, I don't think just putting cameras here and there every now and again is going to be sufficient. And they must have cost a lot of money.
The cameras?
Yeah.
Your
mobile units?
The mobile units do not cost North Yorkshire Police money.
Well, they're going to cost somebody some money.
No, they don't. They make money.
Well, they don't go from there. We don't go from there. So, is that the reason we put them out there?
No.
It's easy for the motorists. That's the message.
No, the police safety camera vans are deployed according to very strict rules and regulations. As Inspector Everitt mentioned, there is a speed monitoring process that goes on that analyses whether or not there is an issue. They also look at the accidents on the roads as well. So the vans are deployed around road safety. So they are self-financing, but they are not there to make money.
Last month, North Yorkshire Police announced the launch of 3 new camera safety vans. It was at the official launch that I asked the Commissioner to explain the funding process. Could you explain how these vehicles are funded?
The vehicles are self-funding. So when somebody is sent on one of the speed awareness courses that you can opt to go on instead of taking points on your licence, you pay I think it's about £95. Of that, £35 is sent straight back to the police force, back to North Yorkshire Police, and we feed that money back into running these vehicles and investing in the 95 Alive Road partnership, so that we can continue to invest in schemes to keep our roads safe.
Okay, can I just come back to one of the questions that was asked in relation to hunting illegally, and also I think the hunts as well and things. A week ago, 2 of my officers in Croxton Forest had a shotgun or a rifle let off over their heads at 3 o'clock in the morning when there was a report of poachers up into the Stake area, and unwittingly they came too close, and there was teams from Redcar had come down, and anyway, local officers, including armed response vehicles, yes, armed response vehicles up in Stake on the Ryedale Road, came and plotted up, and we found these vehicles as they came out. In fact, 2 of my police officers were faced with 8 men in 2 vehicles wearing balaclavas, and they were out poaching the red deer, which I understand there is an estate population up in Stake, which fetches quite a good price per carcass. They were followed by the Zulu Papa units, bearing in mind this is now 5 o'clock in the morning, there's only a couple of us there as they headed towards Gisborough, and then with Cleveland Police we then did a firearms warrant the next morning and arrested the insured keepers of both vehicles, and detained at Middlesbrough and things. So certainly in terms of working collaboration, not just in terms of crime but in terms of poaching issues, then yes, we are very firmly on there, because we know a lot of our poachers and our travelling criminals, who are also, these same individuals, are looking to steal red diesel, looking to steal metal and so on and so forth. They're using roads such as the Ryedale Road, for most of the Side Road, but then coming out undetected through Acton Bridge and out up to the A171 to Gisborne. So I'm currently doing a problem-solving plan around poaching. I'm tying in poaching offences such as this with travelling criminality and burglary others, because there's a whole gamut of things. The suggestion that these people will refill their 4x4s by stealing red diesel from farms, as well as putting them into barrels to use these vehicles. So yes, I am very much poaching is on my agenda. If you read the local press, you'll see that we're doing joint patrols of rural watch schemes in the south of the Ryedale South. I now want to do more in Ryedale North, and these guys have got a remit through their sergeants to do more rural watch schemes and more joint patrols. We've also got the NFU, Rob Hicks, totally engaged with us in terms of improving rural watch, but also improving the flow of communication back to us. You give me and my team the opportunity to go and lock these people up or speak to them about burglary matters, then I will do that. We've been to the middle of Hull, we've gone to the middle of South Bank and talked to people, if it's only to give them a hard word, because my key issues are deter and disrupt, and then if we detect, that's a bonus, but deter and disrupt, because we have low crime levels here and we want to maintain that, but we don't want to see it as a soft target. So poaching is definitely being dealt with seriously. It is a crime. One of the key ones for us as well is raptor persecution. It's in the local press. My brother is actually the Scottish Wildlife Crime Unit officer up in Scotland, based in Edinburgh, covers all Scotland, but he comes down to the UK and does a lot of work here with his counterparts down here. Even he knows that on the North Yorkshire moors there is a raptor persecution issue, and certainly two of my wildlife crime officers, Jez Williams and Stuart Ashton, have been doing a couple of persecutions and dealing with buzzers who have been shot and poisoned. So another element of thing. Now, we understand the economy and the grass shooting, but there needs to be a balance found, and we're working on that. So yes, give that reassurance that we're taking that seriously. The last hunt season at the meeting within the north of England was run by the Middleton Hunt, who attracted 35 hunt saps from Nottingham, Liverpool and Manchester, who met at 9 o'clock at Leeds railway station, and met by people with personnel carriers, who came up to the Middleton Hunt, attacked two of the gamekeepers, knocked them out, and on one other incident they attacked a gamekeeper's vehicle and damaged all the panels of the vehicle by kicking it. Fortunately, one of the riders happened to have the presence of mind as he was approaching this lot and surrounded the gamekeeper's vehicle to get his mobile phone out. So we then had video footage. It was going like that, it was going up and down this thing, but it was good enough because one of the hunt saboteurs was not wearing a balaclava, and he was the main one who was kicking most of the panels of this vehicle. Because whilst we maintain the rights for peaceful protest, overstepping the marks in terms of criminal trespass and putting damage and assaults is out and out criminality. We were able to stop all three, chase them around all thing and kept them away from the hunt. And then we stopped all four vehicles at the end of the day at the bottom of Gary Hill. And I was down there with the team, so we stopped all four vehicles. 35 hunt saps, all dressed in camouflage gear, all carrying a citronella, all video recording everything we did. So one of my team video recorded this little mobile photo footage, and we went through every single person in the things. We were able to arrest 2 people and match the description of the person who was putting the damage inside the vehicle, and he's actually been positively identified as the one. So, but what that said is, because we arrested 2, that they're going to come back and revisit the Middleton Hunt next season. And the Middleton Hunt have gone for 10 years without that. So what we're trying to do in relation to that, we do not support in terms of the hunts and that thing, but what we need to do, we need to educate people who ride with our hunts in Ryedale, what their powers are as citizens, and what they can and can't do, and issues around taking precautions in relation to videoing when they do the drag, so we can show to protesters that this is a drag hunt, and here's the video taken today of the drag taking place. To be carrying recording equipment when they're out riding, because they'll record you and you record them back. So just trying to raise an awareness on all sides so that we don't get the level of criminality, because when often hunts people are threatened, and understandably so, they become uptight because the horse is shy and so on and so forth. So we're working with the hunts to try and educate and work with both groups, both protesters and to both the hunts. We will facilitate peaceful protest, by protesters, as long as it's exactly that, peaceful protest, and they do it within the bounds of the law.
Can I just come back? Do the hunts tell you where they are going to lay their trails on the morning of the hunt?
They will do now.
They will.
Because we have had no issues in relation to, yes, one instance, we've had no issues related to hunt saboteurs. The south of the county, Selby, and the hunts that meet down there, we had a lot of it. But we haven't had it in Ryedale. So there will now be that coordination of, yes, exactly where they're going to be going.
Right, so if they've gone somewhere else, they're not following a trail.
Good point, because, and I can't substantiate this, the protesters, the hunt protesters who I struck a good rapport with whilst we were going to try and identify who committed this damage, will actually say we're only here because we've had intelligence there's been a kill. Okay? And that's why that's how they tend to pick on people. But also it was the only hunt that was going on that day.
And can I just also point out my original question and my worry? I'm over the moon you're attacking poachers, you're attacking, or targeting, should I say, targeting illegal coursers, that you're targeting people out to...
We've arrested people that seize dogs and vehicles just recently.
Badger baiters and what have you. What worries me, and the gamekeepers, what worries me is they are all working class people doing exactly the same thing as the red-coated huntsman. And yet the red-coated huntsman, while your men were driving around following the saboteurs that day, who was following the hunt? Because Debbie here, she was one of the first hunt saboteurs to get a successful prosecution against a hunt steward in this area for assault causing actual bodily harm. So don't just pretend it's the hunt saboteurs that can be bad.
If you're listening to what I said, I have arranged, I've been to see the Middleton hunt with my local big manager, and arranging for an awareness session for all people who ride out so they understand what the limitations are in law in relation to use of force. Because if there is an overstepping of the mark on either side, we will deal people with completely impartially.
That's all we ask.
That's the whole thing I'm doing, is raising awareness on both sides. The protesters know their rights and know the law inside and back to front, and actually are very educated the law and probably know better than a lot of my cops. Okay? Whereas perhaps some of the people right out in the hunt perhaps need some assistance in terms of understanding, in terms of citizens, what is reasonable force and what they can and do. So that conflict management, because that's what it's about, managing conflict, we're going to bring some input with them so that I can then turn around and say, you know what your expectations are, you know how far you can go, and we will deal with people impartially.